evening, everybody. Welcome to the Norman Rockwell Museum. It's great to see you. My name is Stephanie Plunkett. I'm Deputy Director and Chief Curator, and we are thrilled to have you with us. Do we have any first-time visitors to the museum? Oh, not too many. That's great. Well, welcome. It's great to see you. As many of you may know, the Norman Rockwell Museum has a very unique mission. We are devoted to the art of illustration. So we study the work by artists that has been published from about the period of the American Civil War to today. And we've been very fortunate to have this wonderful exhibition, Hanna-Barbera, The Architects of Saturday Morning, on view since November, and it has brought so many families, so many people who love animation, and it's been a great joy to have here at the museum. I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Jesse Kowalski, who is the curator of this exhibition. He has been here at the Norman Rockwell Museum for about 3 years now? 2 years. Oh my gosh, time. Anyway, he's been a wonderful colleague for 2 years, but before that, he was at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he created many exhibitions, and I actually got to meet Jesse because he did a show of art of Alex Ross, and that traveled to this museum. So we're thrilled to have Fred Seibert with us this evening. It is a very exciting launch to a series of programs that we're going to be doing focusing on Masters of Animation Art. And we do have a schedule up front in case you're interested in coming to additional programs. But welcome to Fred, and Jesse will tell you a lot more about Fred as well. Thank you for coming, everybody, and have a great evening.
Good evening. I want to thank Stephanie for having faith in me to present a Hanna-Barbera exhibition here, the first of its kind. And thanks to Rich Bradway and Pat O'Donnell, Tom Daly, and Bill Sobel for making this happen. Also thanks to Cliff Sobel, Gregory Bray, Catherine and Sydney from SUNY New Paltz. And thanks also to our security guards who ensure our safety and the safety of our artwork for future generations. And be sure to give them a glad hand on the way out. I'll start the evening off with a quote from a wise man who once said, "I'm attracted to community, to places where disenfranchised people find what they love and find each other and get creative. I'm attracted to heart and soul and humor and to things that are wild, weird, and unpredictable. I guess you could say I'm attracted to crazy." I would like to thank that man for being here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Seibert.
Did I say that?
Yeah. If you didn't know, Fred actually played a major role in shaping a lot of the popular culture of the 1980s through today. Through his work at the very beginning of MTV, through the revitalization of Nickelodeon, VH1, Hanna-Barbera, and through building a world of online animation, Fred continues to change the way we look at media and animation. In planning the Hanna-Barbera exhibition, Fred was actually the second person I spoke with after Jerry Beck. Fred is just so well connected in the industry and so well respected that he was such a big help in getting the exhibit off the ground. And of course his enthusiasm was heartening. So before we get started in the minutiae of everything you've accomplished in your life, let's talk about your childhood. So I picture a little Fred,
Yes, doctor.
little Fred Seibert in 19-something eating his Sugar Smacks, drinking a mix of Nesquik chocolate powder and milk, watching Huckleberry Hound, writing letters to the TV station with ideas for better programming and advising the older kids how to improve their treehouse design. At an age when most people now look back at their lives and what they've accomplished and start making plans for retirement, Fred seems like he has as much energy, enthusiasm, and optimism today as the average 8-year-old, which is a good thing.
I suppose so.
So my first question, Fred, did your parents find you exhausting?
Yeah, actually. I was a little, probably what we now call ADD, and I had a lot of energy. I didn't write to the TV stations because I didn't know that you could. It didn't occur to me, actually, that there were human beings behind that screen, like doing anything. They were all just sort of magical figures to me. But, my parents were really supportive and encouraging giving me music lessons when I was young, being able to tell me I could do anything that I wanted to do. They were really upset when I actually took them up on that and didn't do what they wanted me to do, for my life. But it worked out really well. It was a very supportive environment.
And who inspired you growing up?
Boy, well, it started with my parents. They were both pharmacists. My mother was basically a political refugee from World War II who had come to the United States basically against her will. She didn't know she was coming to stay. Her father brought her after the Iron Curtain fell in Eastern Europe and was surprised when they landed the boat on the dock, and he said, "We're never going back," which was surprising. But she was already an accomplished woman with a master's degree and, ready to roar. My dad came from a small farm town in upstate New York and found himself in pharmacy school, in a school where my mother was actually working. That's where they met. And they started business together on Long Island and couldn't afford babysitters. So I started working when I was 3 or 4 years old and never stopped. And that was really, the inspiration for everything, right? Which is that I was in a family who did not live to work, they worked to live. And that has sort of continued on, sometimes to the chagrin of my own family, I think. I work a lot, and I like to work. And that really got me going, in a lot of ways. Then television was one of my main childhood inspirations because sadly I was addicted from a really early age. Hanna-Barbera was one of my great inspirations. When I was 7, I think Huckleberry Hound hit the air. Yeah. And, for the kids of that generation, that was the equivalent of a big rock star band. It was the biggest thing. It was really the first major series made for television. Crusader Rabbit had been made before that, which was, also one of my favorite shows. But nothing like Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Pixie and Dixie, which were, all together in that show. And then sort of the capper of that moment was the Flintstones coming out when I was 9. And which led to another inspirational person, which is I had a neighbor named Frank Olinsky. He's a year older than I am. He was a fabulous artist even at 7, 8 years old. And when the Flintstones came out, he started charging us each 50 cents to draw Fred Flintstone on our sweatshirts. And I was amazed that anybody could draw like that. And I immediately got a pencil and started trying to do it myself and realized that I was not capable. And Frank, he was enough of an inspiration that when I was in my 20s and went to work at the company that became MTV, I hired him to design what is now the famous MTV logo, he and his partners. And he continues to do work for me now in his 60s, now that we're both in our 60s. So he's been an inspiration my entire life.
Oh, that's great. How did you get started in the media business? It was in college with a radio station?
Yeah, actually, I went to college to study chemistry because my family is all filled with scientists. And I love chemistry. I was a science math kid, when I was in school. I ignored English class and got bad grades, not realizing that I would spend the rest of my life working with writers. And a few weeks into school, I realized that I liked the Beatles more than I liked the zoology class that I was sitting in. And I walked out pretty much never to return. And I worked up to the college radio station, where a friend of mine told me if I went to work at college radio, I'd get a lot of free records. And in our generation, records were currency. And I only had a dozen. And so I wanted, free records. And that was when I started meeting the next set of inspirations in my life. One of them sitting in the back, David Reitman, is over there. And David's a few years older than I am. And he and a bunch of our colleagues started making me realize there was more to life than Jimi Hendrix, and started introducing me to classical music to jazz, which is really the thing that sort of fired my stuff. And one day, David did a midnight show, and he said, there's a bunch of musicians coming in, a vibes player named Carl Berger, an avant-garde vibist, and we need somebody to record them in the studio. And I stepped up, I volunteered. I had no idea what I was doing, none. And I sat in a little room, put on some headphones, set up microphones in front of all the musicians. As it turned out, there was a trumpet player there that I had gone to high school with, which was fabulous. And as soon as I started hearing the sound come into my headphones, I was home. I was ready. And that began the phase of my life that has continued ever since. It was really, thanks to David actually accepting my volunteering to help his radio show.
That's great. And then 1981, MTV called? Yeah, so, what I didn't understand anything about the business, right? The only thing I knew were the four Beatles, and I knew that they had an older guy who they called the producer. Yeah. And the day I decided to stop playing music myself, I realized that older guy could be my model. He was the guy behind the glass, and I liked being behind the glass. And since he was 20 years older than them, I figured I had 20 years to learn what he did. Yep. And little by little, I got myself some freelance work here and there. I started working at a country music radio station. And I had a mentor there who introduced me to another radio guy who called one day and said, "Hey, I work in cable TV now." And I'm like, what's cable TV? And he said, "Well, come and meet me." I said, "Well, I watch TV. I don't make it." At that point in my life, all I wanted to do was make records. I was really excited and jazzed by music. I thought at the time I was a music guy. I have since found out that I'm more of a pop culture guy than I am specifically a music guy. I went and met him. He was 2 years younger than I was, and he was so much smarter than me that I realized I had to quit my job in radio and go right to work in cable TV. So May 1980, I go to work for this guy. He ran the movie channel, which is one of the 24-hour, at the time it was one of the few competitors with HBO. Yep. And a month into my employment there, a memo comes out on my desk, and my boss, a guy named Bob Pittman, had sketched out in a page and a half what would be the next 10 years of my life. He basically laid out what was going to be called the music channel, and said we're starting it whenever, in a year, something like that. So I march into his office and I go, "What's this mean to me?" He said, "Oh, well, you're going to get a new boss." I was like, oh my God, I quit my job in radio to come to work for you, and now you're going to pawn me off on someone I've never met. So, my jazz background had prepared me to improvise really well. I said, "Oh, you have to hire me for this new music thing." He said, "Why?" "Well, I know more about music than anybody here. I know more about music than you do. You walked in the morning with Variety, and I walked in with Musician Magazine." Yeah. I said, "Oh, you're right. Okay, you're hired. You're in." And I said, "Okay, great. I'll find somebody to replace me at the movie channel." He said, "Oh, no, you have to do both jobs." And now I'm working at a job for half pay because it was a startup, and I was basically working on intern wages. And now I have two jobs. And that got me started really in television in a big way. That's great. So when you started at MTV, how did you get involved with, you helped create the logo, or that was your idea?
Well, one of the things that Bob was very open to, that's my Marco Rubio, everybody. One of the things he was really open to is anyone who would stand up and say they're willing to do something. Yep. So as soon as we did that, I said, I know exactly the guy who should do a logo for us, my friend Frank. And, he'll do it for a good price. He said, "Okay, go." So at that point, it was called the Music Channel. We knew nothing else. It was going to launch, this was in June of 80, and we knew we were going to launch in August of 81. So I went down to Frank's studio. He had two partners behind the Tai Chi studio above Bigelow's Chemists on 6th Avenue. I said, hey, do you guys want to do a logo for us? They went, yeah, absolutely. They didn't have any jobs. Like, I think I was the first client to walk in. And for 8 or 9 months, they just kept designing new logos. And I just kept saying, no, 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 no. And finally, we had to say yes to something, and they came in with the last batch. No, I go through. I mean, we probably looked at 500 logos over the course of the year. And finally, at the bottom of the pile, on a piece of tracing paper that had been crumpled up and flattened out, was the giant M that you now know as the MTV logo. And I was like, okay, that's it. We're in, and we went to town.
That's great. And then the I won my MTV, with Billy Idol and all that. That was yours?
The mentor who had introduced me to effectively MTV had quit the radio business and started his own advertising agency. But he was known as a disruptive lunatic who was brilliant but crazy. And when I suggested that we hire his agency actually at the movie channel, I was summarily thrown out of the room. We can't have that. We have to have someone that's well known in the advertising business. Yeah. And we hired another agency that was very well known, very respected. I was actually in awe of them. And we hired them to be our first agency, and they did an absolutely horrible job. They looked at the MTV logo, turned white, and ran out of the room and brought me a list of the agency's rules for logos. There were 10 rules. And I went through them, and I was making little check marks. I said, okay, well, we only follow 2 of the rules. And they, right, you can't have this as your logo. I'm like, no, that's exactly why we have it as a logo. We're a rock and roll channel. Like, we have to break rules. That's what we do. And at that point, they had done such a miserable job that finally, out of desperation, because the company was losing a ton of money, the elders of the company finally said, okay, you can try this guy. His name is Dale Pond. He had partnered with a famous advertising guy at that point named George Lois. And we hired them. They came up with I Want My MTV, which, to this day, interestingly, if you search the words I Want My MTV in Google, you get about 500,000 responses, even though that phrase and campaign has not been on the air since 1989. Wow. Yeah, it's an amazing, it was an amazing campaign that they did and changed the trajectory of the company. Yeah,
great. And in spring 1983, Fred Allen was formed.
Yeah, my friend Alan Goodman.
Yeah, can you tell me
about another college radio station friend.
Yeah, can you tell me about that company?
Yeah, so I not only was the earliest guy hired at MTV, I was the first senior manager to quit. I had been in a corporate meeting where one of the elders in the company started screaming at someone else in front of 10 of us, humiliating this poor person. And I just decided I was never going to sit through a meeting like that again. And I walked into Alan Goodman's office. He was my creative director and had been my companion in college radio. And I said, I'm quitting. And he said, now? I said, no, we have to figure out how we're going to make some money. So we spent about a year sitting together with friends trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I kept a list of all the things I thought people could do to pay us money. And when I got to it took me about a year to fill up the page. And when I got to the bottom of the page, we said, okay, we're ready now. We quit our jobs and set up, this company. We thought it was hilarious that we were calling it Fred Allen. But at that point, we were 30 years old. And we realized that only people over 50 or 60 would have any idea that it was funny. So whatever, we laughed to ourselves. And we started, booking little jobs here and there. And one day, Bob Pittman, my former boss at MTV, called up and said, could we hire you as consultants? He made the deal of his life. He paid us a third of what he had paid us in salary to be consultants. And immediately assigned us to Nickelodeon, which was their failing children's channel. At that point, Nickelodeon was the number 30 rated cable channel, and there were only 30 cable channels. It was like the lowest rated cable channel.
Yeah, you noted that it was a kids network that nobody watched, least of all kids.
Exactly.
So what was the programming like when you arrived there?
Well, it's interesting because when I sat with a woman they had fired almost all the senior management except for one woman named Jerry Laybourne. Mm-hmm. And I went into her office and I said, well, what's the problem? She said, we can't figure it out. Actually, we have done something that nobody else has done, which is every show that we run, we have tested out with kids. We have shown them to kids all across the country. They all really like the shows. Yeah. They just don't watch them. And we said, okay, what do you think the problem is? By the way, we knew nothing about kids. Yeah. And they were really upset that we had been hired because we were the evil people who did that weird rock and roll stuff for teenagers, and we were distorting the minds of youth. Mm-hmm. And here was a group of people who are trying to do good things for kids. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, the only thing we can figure out is we keep telling kids that we're fun. The problem is we're not, right? Which is the shows were really good, but the environment that they put it in was not so good. It was a very, what they used to call a green vegetable environment. Like, this is really good for you kids. And we're lots of fun. So Alan and I immediately banned the word fun from the vocabulary. And we said that we didn't really know too much about kids programming, but if you say the stuff's good, we will take you at your word. But what we have to do is create an environment where kids are happy to be here. They had done a bunch of focus groups, and they found out a couple of interesting things. One is that 44% of everybody who had cable tuned into Nickelodeon at least once a week and stayed for less than 6 minutes. And no matter who they asked, no matter what kid they asked, a 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old, every kid said, well, Nickelodeon's for babies. And they realized that what they meant by that is, if I don't like it, and it's for kids, it must be for someone younger than me, and anyone younger than me is a baby, right? An 11-year-old thought a 10-year-old was a baby, and a 5-year-old thought a 2-year-old was a baby, whatever. So we went about hiring young creative people who were wonderful writers, had great senses of humor, didn't really know all that much about television, certainly didn't know anything about promotion. And we gave them the keys to the castle. We sort of set up their bumpers, their bowling lane bumpers, and said, you need to say these 4 or 5 things about Nickelodeon. Other than that, go to town, have a great time, do the most creative work that you can. If you can't figure out how to do it, we'll help you. And this young team, one by one, would make these little interstitial spots for Nickelodeon that nobody could deny. No kid of any age could deny that it was for them. And we basically said that we were going to set up Nickelodeon as the greatest clubhouse for kids in all of television. It was the only place for kids that was on 7 days a week. At that point, the architects of Saturday morning, Hanna-Barbera, had dominated Saturday morning, but it was 4 hours a week. And kids with cable television, interestingly, the show that they watched the most at that moment in time, the highest rated kids show on television, were reruns of Starsky and Hutch, because it was the show that was on when they got home after school. So we created this great environment. And a really interesting thing happened, which is 6 months later, Nickelodeon had become the most watched cable channel in America. It went from worst to first.
Give them a round of applause.
but once again, it wasn't that we did anything special other than talk to kids in language they wanted to speak with, they wanted to hear. And just from a statistical point of view, that 44% of kids who tuned in and watched for less than 6 minutes, they were now watching 30 minutes a week, right? And which is what really put Nickelodeon on the map.
And you created Nick at Night, right?
Yeah, well, one day Jerry Laybourne and Bob Pittman came to us, and Nickelodeon went off the air at 8 o'clock at night. Funny enough, kids have to go to sleep, right? And they need to be put to bed. And they had been leasing out the back end of the channel from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. To a channel called Arts, which is now the A&E channel, what became Arts and Entertainment. And at the time, the technological limitation of cable TV is there was one satellite in the sky. It had 24 transponders, which meant 24 channels could go on. And so that was a scarce resource. And it happened that our company owned 3 of them. It was for the movie channel, for MTV, and for Nickelodeon. But since Nickelodeon went off at 8 o'clock and it was expensive to rent a transponder, they rented it out. One day, Arts A&E showed up and said, oh, we have our own 24-hour transponder now, sayonara. And all of a sudden, the channel went to black. And the company said, it's too expensive to just, not use this transponder. Come up with something. So Jerry came to Alan and I and said, we have to do something, and there's really a problem. What's the problem? Well, Bob has licensed 250 episodes of the Donna Reed Show, a black and white sitcom, for those of you who don't know it, from 1960, a very classic family sitcom. And I said, well, what's the problem with that? She said, well, it's a horrible show. It gives really bad messages to women. Because Donna is always like, in her jewels and her skirt and cooking and, doing things. I said, well, when I was a teenager, I was homesick for a couple of months with mononucleosis. And I actually watched reruns of the Donna Reed Show every day. And in those 2 months, it never wore out on me. It's not a bad show. And there were other shows that I was watching reruns on that, like, I could watch for a week at a time and then, get bored with. So that gives us a great idea. So Alan and I went back. We had already been toying with the notion that had bothered us as kids. So just like rock and roll, adults, when I was a kid, said television is terrible. And it is really the vast wasteland that Newton Minow had put out there. And television in those days was considered disposable. You see it, it goes rerun in the summer, and then it gets canceled, and you never see it again. Alan and I felt that old television had exactly the same role in our lives that old records did, and why not create the first oldies television channel? And instead of doing what most television did, which is hold their nose and say, we have reruns, we said, how about this? We have reruns. We made it an exciting opportunity for everybody. What if instead of considering the old television, we treat it like it's new television? We use a 1980s sense of humor, a sensibility, the idea that this is an exciting place to be. We launched Nick at Night, I think, in the middle of 1985. And within a year, it was the second highest rated primetime block on cable television.
That's great.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It's actually, in many ways, though MTV is a great part of our legacy, I think we're prouder of Nickelodeon turning it around from zero to first and inventing the first oldies television station than almost anything else we've ever done.
That's terrific. And then you could have stopped there, but you went on to work at Comedy Central and get that up.
Yeah, that was another channel that MTV Networks owned. And we thought that there was a great opportunity there. We actually named it Comedy Central and thought it could be the equivalent of what Saturday Night Live had been for the comedic generation before. We thought that it could be for the next generation. As it turned out, it took 20 years for it to get there, but it was a good start.
Right, let's see.
I should have kept talking, right?
Let's see. Okay. And then from there you went to VH1 and relaunched that in 1991.
Yeah, we relaunched. VH1 has been relaunched about a dozen times during its existence, and we actually launched VH1 from scratch in '85. Then relaunched it again somewhere in the late '80s, and then in '91 relaunched it again and created it as essentially the first oldies video network. Right? MTV had been on the air for 10 years. Why not have an oldies network? It worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Until it didn't.
That's Okay, and then in 1992, you got in touch with Ted Turner, who he brought you on board to revitalize an animation company that was once monumental, but at that time was kind of running on fumes.
It had kind of faded, right?
Yeah. So how were you brought into Hanna-Barbera?
Well, this is one of those, wacky stories. Fred Allen had created a great reputation for itself, and one day I got a call from the head of marketing at Hanna-Barbera, for a meeting. Mm-hmm. And we sat down, and he started telling us about these new primetime shows they were launching. Yeah. And to be quite honest with you, I had absolutely no interest in their primetime shows for two reasons. One is I didn't think they were going to be good. What did I know? And two, I knew that they wouldn't pay me what I was interested in being paid. They were really cheap. Yeah. So I spent the entire breakfast quizzing him about the library of Hanna-Barbera and where it was. And it turned out that the Hanna-Barbera studio at that particular moment in time had no connection to its library at all. Mm-hmm. And I just kept digging and digging and digging with him. And I went back to Nickelodeon. And I said, I have this great idea. We've been running the Yogi Bear show, and we turned it into a real ratings hit. Mm-hmm. Why don't we talk Hanna-Barbera into giving us the rest of their library for free? We will build it up in value again, and they'll be able to sell tons of T-shirts. I didn't know anything about selling T-shirts or anything like that. And the management at Nickelodeon said, well, they'll never do that. And I said, well, you can try. Mm-hmm. Why don't you just go and make an offer for free, and worst case, you get it for 50 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. So I wrote out a little script for them, and they called up, and they came back to me sort of incredulously and said, they're giving us 7 shows for 50 cents on the dollar. We just saved $10 million. So I said, great, how about, will you give me a bonus? And they said, well, no, we already pay you. You're our consultant. I said, we're your consultant for logos and for promos and stuff, not for acquisitions. Yeah. You just saved $10 million. How about just do me a favor and write us a check for $100,000 and make us feel good? Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't do it. Yeah. And so I was ticked. So anywhere I went for the next 6-8 months, I complained that they had welched on us and wouldn't give us the money. And one of the guys that I went to have dinner with one night was Ted Turner's head of entertainment, Scott Sasso. Mm-hmm. So I'm explaining to him what happened. He said, I thought you do logos. And I said, yeah, but this wasn't that hard. We did. He said, oh, gee, that's too bad, right? That was sort of the end of that. About a year later, Scott calls back and said, hey, Ted just bought the Hanna-Barbera studio. I said, yeah, no, I saw it in the paper. Good luck. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, there's really a problem. We wanted to buy it for the library. The studio has been losing $10 million a year. They haven't had a hit since the Smurfs in 1981. Mm-hmm. And it's a train wreck over there. I said, gee, that's too bad. Best of luck. What am I going to say? And he said, I have this idea. Why don't you come out and run the studio? And I paused. He knew that Alan and I were thinking about closing up Fred Allen. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my watch, and lo and behold, on my watch was at 12 o'clock was Scooby-Doo. Mm-hmm. At 3 o'clock was Huckleberry Hound. Mm-hmm. At 6 o'clock was Fred Flintstone, and at 9 o'clock was Yogi Bear. Mm-hmm. Just 10:35 in the morning. It was, I think, February, something like that. I said, I can't be there till June. He said, we'll wait. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, well, it's I can't close it. Ted won't let me close the studio. If we have to wait, we'll wait. I said, I know nothing about cartoons. He goes, oh, you do all those logos for Nickelodeon. Uh-huh. I said, that's 10 seconds of wiggling the logo, and I hire animators to do that. I don't know anything about that. I've never seen a storyboard. I've never read an animation script. He said, look, it couldn't get worse. So Alan and I decided to close Fred Allen. Mm-hmm. We had a 90-day contract with our clients that, we had to work with them for another 90 days. We did that, Sadly, like in my own life, I was getting divorced, and I couldn't actually. Alan and I were at wit's end with each other. He had just eloped with my sister, and I knew I was going to have to see him on holidays anyway. But we were kind of sick of each other at that point, and the idea of moving 3,000 miles across the country looked like a pretty good deal. Yeah. So I took the job. I arrived in June of 1992. To 300 or 400 employees who had no idea what I was doing there. And truth be told, I had no idea what I was doing there. I was scared to death. I had only driven by the Hanna-Barbera building for 20 years as I was visiting Los Angeles. And I would see the sign up on top that said Hanna-Barbera, and I wonder what it's like in there. It must be amazing, they do Huckleberry Hound, I walk in for the first time, and I'm president of the company. It was like a completely surreal experience. They sit me down in what had been Bill Hanna's office, and they had now said was my office. There was a desk there that was so big, it had been built for Bill, custom built for Bill in 1961. Wow. It looked like it had come from the Jetsons, it was like sort of a curve. It looked big enough to sleep a family of 4. I'm like, well, doesn't Bill want this office? No, he wants to be as far away from. He had a little office on the 3rd floor. He was 82 years old. Right across the hall was Joe Barbera. They were both signed for life as consultants to the studio.
Yes. What were they doing at the time? Were they just figureheads, or were they still in charge of production?
They had actually sold the company to a company called Taft Broadcasting in 1966. Yep. They thought that maybe their day was up. They sold it for what we would now think of as a pittance, the whole company for $12 million. And then Taft had blown up in the early 80s, and it had gone through a whole bunch of machinations and was now owned by a company called Great American. Yeah. It was run by a guy called Carl Lindner, who is the chairman of Chiquita Banana. And he had started Great American so his son could get into show business.
Yeah, and Iwo Takamoto said that Great American just wanted to puff up Hanna-Barbera so they could sell it for a profit.
No, actually, they wanted Hanna-Barbera so the son could be in show business. Right? Then when they realized that wasn't going to work, then they wanted to sell it for a profit. But it was actually not put together for that purpose. Okay. But at that point, they had put a very hefty price tag on it. $350 million. And by traditional showbiz accounting, it was actually worth $175 million. And nobody even wanted to put up the $175 million. Right. Actually, Universal Studios thought they might want to buy it, but they kept holding out for a better price, and Carl kept saying no. And finally, Ted convinced his staff, who had all told him, no, Ted, we never want to buy Hanna-Barbera. You never pay more than $175 million for it. He had convinced them that the $350 was a decent price. And borrowed $300 million of the money, put up $50 million of his own dollars, and bought the company outright solely for the library. Remember, 6 or 7 years before, he had a disaster buying the MGM library, the MGM studio. It made him bankrupt. He sold the studio back to its original owner, but kept the library and launched TNT off of it. He realized that he could set up Cartoon Network with the same scheme with the Hanna-Barbera library. So, long story short, I get there, I don't know anything about cartoons. I call a meeting of the senior staff, and I said, there's good news and bad news. The bad news for you is I know nothing about cartoons, and I'm the boss. The good news is you all know about cartoons, so why don't we make a deal? Why don't you tell me what to do, and I will do it. Immediately, about half of them quit. They were used to working under Joe and Bill, who were now, again, consultants. They were kind of figureheads, but were each in their own way eager to contribute. Sure. Right? They literally came to work every day. They were very excited. Their names were on the building. And a couple of them came up to me afterward and said, look, whatever we can do to help, we'll help. The problem is I didn't know what I wanted them to do, and they didn't know what to do to tell me because they had run under this dictatorship that Joe and Bill had run for so long that they were used to doing what they were told. Yeah. And in fact, I went up to the head of production after this meeting, and I said, "So what do we do well? Like, what's the studio good at?" Like I would know what she was talking about. And she said, "We can do anything. Please just tell us what to do." And I was flummoxed because I didn't know. Yeah. So I went into Joe's office, and he said, "I'll do everything. Just tell me what I can do everything." And I thought to myself, this is a really tough position to be in. Here were these two men who had basically been part of inventing the cartoon business as we knew it. Not just television, but in all their years doing Tom and Jerry at the MGM studio and stuff. They were truly part of the innovation that created the animation business. But it was clear that they had lost the mojo in terms of what to do for the contemporary market. Yeah. So I had to quietly back out of Joe's office, sort of nodding my head, going, "Great idea, Joe," and go back to my office and be freaked out. So Mike Lazo was the head of programming at the Cartoon Network. And he came to me one day and said, "I think we should put together an advisory group for Cartoon Network. And I'd like Joe and Bill to be on it. And I've gotten Friz Freeling to be on it, and Chuck Jones to be on it, and John Crisfalusi, the creator of Ren and Stimpy, a young guy who had sort of helped revitalize the cartoon business." And so we went and we had this meeting. And Mike at one point says to him, "So what made a great cartoon producer?" And Joe Barbera always had the best stories ever. And he said, "Well, our producer at MGM, Fred Quimby, he was the greatest producer." And Mike and I were both sort of quizzical because we knew that Joe and Bill hated Fred Quimby. Yeah.
Fred Quimby they won 7 Oscars for Tom and Jerry.
Yes.
Bill and Joe, and Fred Quimby kept them all.
Yeah, he took all of their awards from them. So he said, so Fred would come in the morning, and he would, have a couple meetings with people, and at 11 o'clock every day, his barber would come in and give him a shave and a trim. And then at lunch, he would go to lunch with all the movie stars in the commissary. He'd come back half in the bag from lunch and call the East Coast distributors to find out what the grosses were from yesterday. And then at 4 o'clock, he'd go home. He was a fabulous producer. And I thought to myself, I could do that job. I'd be pretty good at that. And I said, "Well, how'd the cartoons get made?" He goes, "Oh, we were off in another building just doing what we felt like doing." Yeah. And through this advisory meeting, I heard them say that, they were the cartoonists and they invented the stuff, and they would make something one by one, put it in the theater, and if it worked, they'd get the order to make another one. And I thought that was a fabulous idea. I said, "Why can't we do that in television?" Well, television isn't made that way. There was some cockamamie way of how television was made. And I realized that exactly the same way they had done it in the 30s and 40s, we could do it now in the 90s. And I went and I told my boss, Scott Sassa, and he said, "Great, let's tell Ted." And I told Ted about it, and Ted, he said to me, "So far you've failed. You've made a couple series and they've been, they haven't worked. Yeah. What makes you think that you can do it this way?" I said, "Well, if you give me another $10 million, I'll make 48 short cartoons. Even not knowing anything, if I do something 48 times, don't you think one of them will work?" And Ted, being a very natural entrepreneur, went, "You're right. That's great. Go do it." And that was, how we really started reinventing the studio.
And that was called What a Cartoon.
It's called What a Cartoon. We made these 48 short films, and basically we did it the way that all the older cartoonists had told us, which was we went out into the world and said, "What kind of ideas do you all have?" And 5,000 people pitched us their cartoons. And we had enough money to make 48 of them. We made 48, and we ran them as individual cartoons before a Sunday night animated movie on Cartoon Network. We tried to do it like the old days of theatricals. And I didn't really know what I was doing. Luckily, I had a great team of people around. I didn't even know when people would pitch something, whether it was good or not. I had to look around the room and see what they all felt like. And if enough people nodded, I said, oh, great, we can do that one, that type of thing. We literally made shorts with people from Europe, from Asia, but primarily from the young people who were toiling in the studio. They were all part of the factory system within our company, but they were doing storyboards for Flintstone specials. They were designing characters for Scooby-Doo specials, whatever it was that they were doing. And one by one, as those young folk came in, we realized that they had this passion for this medium that seemed to have been lost out of the industry. And we gave a lot of them their shots. And out of What a Cartoon came 6 hit cartoons after a dry spell of 15 years when there was nothing going on at the studio. So Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, I Am Weasel, like some, what are some of the icons still today in the industry.
Sure, that's great. Let's see. So when Warner Brothers took over Hanna-Barbera in 1997, 98, you went back to Nickelodeon. So you helped work on shows like Fairly Odd Parents, My Life as a Teenage Robot, Fanboy and Chum Chum, and Adventure Time. So could you tell me, there's kind of a funny story, I think, about getting Adventure Time on the air? You were initially reluctant to put it on?
No, I was not reluctant. I said no. What a Cartoon had been in the mid-90s. In the early 2000s, when I went back to Nickelodeon and set up my company, Frederator, we had done something called Oh Yeah Cartoons. That's where Fairly Odd Parents came from, My Life as a Teenage Robot, Chalk Zone. And in 2005, we started a new incubator series that was going to be called Random Cartoons. So now, at that point, I think we had been responsible for 99 short films, and that whole group of hit series had come out. And I made the most fatal mistake any executive could make, which is I actually thought I knew something, right? I thought that it was something about the way that I decided to do something that made things work, instead of following the greatest Hollywood adage I've ever heard, written by William Goldman, the screenwriter, who said, in Hollywood, nobody knows anything. At that particular moment in time, I thought I knew something. We hadn't had a new hit since The Fairly Odd Parents in the early 2000s. It's now 2005. And my team, Kevin Coldy and Eric Homan, who had been vetting all of our pitches, had a day of pitches set up for me. I'd already moved back to New York, so I would come out, a couple times a month and see, new things. And Penn Ward, the creator of Adventure Time, was standing there in shorts with a guitar, ready to pitch. He had his thing up. And I have to say, no pitch had ever started with a guitar. And he started, he sang the song that now has become the theme song of Adventure Time. And then, took his pointer and started, pointing it out. And he did his pitch, and it was over, right? And at the end of the day, we all got together, and we're saying which ones we wanted to think about, which ones we wouldn't do. And when it got to Adventure Time, I said, well, of course, we're not going to do that thing.
Yeah.
And they look at me and they're like, why not? I said, well, he's 1 month out of school, right? Like he showed us this art film. We don't make art. We don't make student films here. Like we need to have a hit, and we need something that looks like a hit, and that doesn't look like anything that we've done and all that. Luckily, Eric and Kevin have worked with me for a long time. Eric actually started with me at Hanna-Barbera in 1992, so we've been together now 25 years. And they basically stood against the door and wouldn't let me out of the office. And they said, look, we have to do this. Well, I don't know, why? Why? And Eric, who really knew how to bust me, he said, well, usually in a pitch you have a fake laugh. You want to be polite to everybody, you make them, think that they're doing nice stuff. He said, this time you really laughed. And I realized that he was right, and he did bust me. And it was one of 39 short cartoons. Like, most of them were likely not to go anywhere anyway. And so we said, absolutely, sure. And as it turned out, it's one of the most magical things that I've ever been involved with. It actually changed the entire trajectory of my career in animation and of Frederator, because Adventure Time reset the game the way that 15 years before Powerpuff Girls had reset the game.
And it's one of the top cartoons on television right now, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's going into its 9th season.
It's the final season, I think.
I think we're in that final season, like right now. Yeah.
Yeah, my kids, John and Catherine, they love Adventure Time.
Well, it's magic.
No, it's triple.
Penn Ward is, well, you know, the truth is, anybody who makes a hit series is magic.
Yeah.
You know, it is lightning in a bottle. We have made 250 short films over the years. About 25 of them have gone to series. Like, odds aren't good. And remember, those 250 are picked out of 10,000, 15,000 pitches, right? We work really hard to find ones that we think are special. And every single one that we do, we make it like its own little special art film, you know, with one creator who has a vision, who has the skill to execute that vision. But coming up with a hit series is not an easy thing. Yeah. We have very little to do with it. It's really all that creator and their persistence, their skills, their talents. Of all of them, you know, something like Adventure Time is, you know, 1 in a trillion. I mean, it's really something.
Okay, if you could tell me about Channel Frederator. It was a company you started in 2005. And then I have a question from someone on the line.
Okay, great. Quickly, in around 2005, we were starting Random Cartoons, but I had been watching the kid business at that point for many years, you know, probably 15 years at that point. And one of the things I noticed is that the kid business likes to use you up and spit you out. And I felt like my time to be spit out was probably coming. And I was, you know, my kids were still young. I had a lot of school tuition to pay. I still have a lot of school tuition to pay. My son is here today on a break from school. And I realized that I couldn't stop earning, and I better figure out something else quick. And so there were 2 areas that we thought like would have some fertility to them. One was animated movies, which we had never been involved in. And the other was this wacky internet thing that had, for that last 10 years, started to show some consumer promise. And right around 2005, more and more high-band Wi-Fi was coming into people's lives, and video was becoming a more viable proposition. So we set up a little movie company. It's now, 12 years later. We still haven't made a movie, by the way. That didn't work. And we started thinking about the internet. So I called a young man who had been building our websites. He had been our intern when he was 14. He was now 17, 18. And I laid out to him something that I thought Frederator could do on the internet, which was make a call out to independent filmmakers for their short films and put them on a website. So this young man, David, said, you know, I can build that for you in a couple of weeks, but it's a very old school idea, very 2000. And, you know, a 17-year-old looking back in 2000 was like I mean, it was like so old. For me, it was like a snap, and I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, you know, people are going to start watching video on portable devices. And he pulls out a Sony PSP, you know, the gaming device, shows me some video. And I go, yeah, I know we have one at home. I know it can play video. He said, you know, within a year, there's going to be a video iPod. And I'm like, there is? You know, like I was like, you know, I'm an old man at that point. I was like 5 years old or something like that. And we argued for like an hour. And I finally said, David, look, if you think it's good, you're into this more than I am, as long as it won't cost me more than $5,000. No, absolutely not. So he goes home. I give him a few shorts to work with. He names the channel Frederator after our production company. He builds the website. His father's a musician. He takes some of his father's music and writes an episode of like what to do. edits it. He puts the whole thing together and presents it to us. And I'm like, hey, this is kind of cool. Like, let's do this. We put it up on iTunes because little did anyone know, I didn't, David and my partner Emil Rensing knew that iTunes supported video. This is before YouTube. We're excited when iTunes says, yes, you can put this up on your thing. My partner Emil goes out and makes a little video of fast cars because he's into cars, and we put them both up. And I said, well, we have to put out a press release. So we write up a press release. We put it out on the PR Wire or whatever, prwire.com. And the exact same day we put out our press release, Apple announces a year before anyone's prediction that there's going to be a video iPod that day. And we're among the only people that have quality video ready for a video iPod. And at every presentation, Steve Jobs starts showing the Frederator logo and the channel Frederator logo. And within a month, we have 1 million downloads. Wow. And David calls up. He said, well, the only bad news is your bandwidth cost is $25,000. I'm like, what's bandwidth? I knew nothing, right? He figured out a way to get it for $30 instead of $25,000. And within another month, 1,000 short animated videos have come our way, and we started Channel Frederator, which to this day, now is on YouTube. And we built a network around it where we distribute independent YouTube channels of animators from around the world. We distribute about 3,000 independent channels. We do about 500 million views on YouTube every 30 days of just animated content. And it's the biggest animation network on YouTube. And
that's great.
It's fantastic. By the way, quick coda to the story.
Yep.
2 years later, David, who built Channel Frederator, calls me up and says, do you think you could rent me a desk? I've been working out of my bedroom. He has a little developer business, internet developer. But yes, David, absolutely, you can come and rent a desk. David rents a desk, he's sitting right next to me. And one day said, I'm launching a business that I just built. It's called Tumblr. And, that same kid who built Channel Frederator for us is David Karp, the founder of Tumblr. One of the great successes of the last 10 years in the internet. So, you never know what happens when you do cartoons.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question from Sean Iddings online. He wants to know what your 10-year vision is for Frederator.
More, better, funnier. That's really it. We love making cartoons. We love having built these internet channels because it gives us a direct relationship with the audience. But it hasn't stopped us. We still have Adventure Time on Cartoon Network. Fairly Odd Parents is in its 15th year on Nickelodeon. We just sold a new show to Nickelodeon. We just announced our first show with Amazon called Costume Quest, based on a video game. And we just announced our first series for Netflix, an R-rated adult horror animated series based on the video game Castlevania. So I guess that's not funnier. I guess. But in general, we're in the comedy business. And our vision is what it's always been, which is that I learned when I was 12 years old that being a fan of the Beatles was awesome. Yeah. And that I would continue trying to be a fan for the rest of my life. And what we do is we just find more and more talented people to be fans of and give them a chance to, see their dreams come true.
That's great. Let's see. Let's talk about the exhibition for a little bit.
Yeah.
How does it feel to see animation on the walls of a major art museum?
Well, as you know, when you reached out to me and told me about this, my first reaction was, it's about time, right? Starting in the, it was in the 80s that Chuck Jones started doing animation art as a standalone kind of business, set up his galleries with his daughter. And I thought it was amazing then, just as a childhood fan of animation, to see the stuff that I loved as a child being treated seriously was incredible. And all during my time at Hanna-Barbera and now at Frederator, I have struggled with the idea that our industries don't take animation seriously. I've gotten into a lot of pretty serious fights with people over the notion that museums pay attention to Charlie Chaplin, they pay attention to the Marx Brothers, they even pay attention to the Three Stooges, right? And yet, all these years later, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years later, people are watching Tom and Jerry cartoons like they're brand new. Mm-hmm. And I have said over and over again that I thought that Joe and Bill were among the greatest film comedians in history. And people don't laugh with me, they laugh at me when I say that. Because it is the Chaplins of the world and the Buster Keatons of the world that are considered the greats. And to me, the fact that audiences are getting joy out of this stuff, like I think 3 or 4 days ago, Turner Broadcasting announced that they're doing an over-the-top channel, a subscription channel with just Hanna-Barbera cartoons called Boomerang, based on their Boomerang TV channel. Mm-hmm. To me, that's like amazing. So the idea that you have curated this show and have taken this stuff as seriously as the great Norman Rockwell stuff that is here, or the great work that we have seen in illustrative art, around the world. Hallelujah, beat the band, it's about time. I think it's fantastic.
Great. Mm-hmm. Terrific. Let's take some questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions for Fred? Yeah.
As somebody who's studying media, do you have any suggestions or any forms of advice that you could give to be so successful in it?
Well, I don't know if it's advice, but I can tell you that what I find exciting, and for me, I'm 65 years old. I have spent most of my career being ticked off at people that they've done something to make my shows less successful than I want them to be. It's always really easy to blame someone. They wouldn't let me make the show I wanted to make. They told me to change the shoes from green to purple. They put it in the wrong time slot. They didn't promote it enough, like whatever it might be. It was always somebody else's fault. In the age of the internet, it's only my fault, right? If we put up something and people don't like it or it doesn't work or whatever it is, there's no one else to blame except for us. And for those of you who are starting out, you have this incredible opportunity, which is there's no one between you and them meaning your audience. If you have an email address and you put it in YouTube, you have an audience of 1 billion people every 30 days who are waiting for what you have to tell them. If you do the same thing at Instagram or you do it at Snapchat, whatever platform it is that you are in love with, to do the media that you believe in, it's up to you. So while you're trying to figure out like how you're going to make a living, always a challenge, right? Every one of us who has made a living in this business for years can tell you a whole series of horror stories of how we failed, how we got a little bit of success, how we failed, and all that. We all go through the same thing all the time. But in the meantime, you have the opportunities to get to an audience, try out your ideas without anyone telling you that you're wrong, and seeing if you're right or wrong and trying it out. So that by the time you actually go out into the world and figure out whether you want to work for someone or whether you want to work for yourself, you will have already had a series of experiences that those of us who have worked in the industry, we had to first get a job. We had to then convince our boss of something. We had to then go through this whole process of, spending somebody else's money to do something. Do you have one of these in your pocket? This is a better production device than most of us have had for most of our careers. I've seen feature films shot on this that I didn't know were shot on a phone. I was like, I'd be shocked afterwards when I found out, right? Because this is amazing. There's nothing between you and them anymore except for you. So the biggest advice I can have is make stuff and make more stuff. And make more and more and more stuff. Because the more stuff you make, the closer you're going to be to making the thing that is the thing you wanted to make.
Thank you.
Great.
Sir.
With Mr. Hanna and Mr. Barbera, what was your major takeaways and how they conducted themselves in business and their relationship with the other animators that they worked with and such that
So the question for the Facebook audience is, what were my major takeaways from working with Joe and Bill? You know, it's not every day that you get to walk into an office every day with two legends. And like I said, they came to work every day. Actually, the first 3 months I was at the studio, Bill wasn't there. He was stuck in a hospital in Taiwan because he had gone over there where we owned an outsourcing studio in Taiwan that did a lot of animation for us. And he had fallen and broken his shoulder. And he had saved this picture. There had been a problem with a picture over there. And toward the end of his hospital stay, the buzz started coming that Bill was coming back. And so I heard that he was flying in, you know, whatever day it was, on a Wednesday and stuff. And I figured, okay, like a week later, he'll get over his jet lag and I'll meet him. So I get into work that morning. And I'm, you know, walking from the parking lot into the building, and I walk into the building, and the first person I bump into is Bill Hanna. And I said, Mr. Hanna, hi, I'm Fred Seibert. I'm your boss. It's great to meet you. Oh, did you get in last week? I thought you were coming in yesterday. He goes, oh, I got in this morning. And he had literally gotten off the plane, gone home, taken a shower, and come to work, and was there before I was. And so what I learned from Bill is what I had learned from my parents, which is, you know, there's nothing that work won't cure. You know, there's nothing you can do that, you know, that a little more work won't, you know, be good for your soul. And sure enough, Bill was one of those guys who just believed in good work and hard work. He was an incredibly modest man. He was living in a house in the San Fernando Valley that was the same house he lived in when he was a contract worker, daily, you know, worker by salary over at MGM 40 years before. He had made millions and millions of dollars. He had actually invested it in real estate all around the state. But he still lived in this same middle-class house that he had always lived in, that he had raised his children in. They were now grown, he had grandchildren, and he was still in that same house with his wife, Violet, you know, thinking of himself as a guy who came to work every day. Joe was an opposite kind of guy. Joe lived large. He loved Hollywood. He loved, you know, telling stories of the movie stars that he knew, of all the people that he had worked with. He drove a fast sports car at 80 years old. But he also loved coming into work every day. At the time that I started at the studio, he was still producing a show for Fox, which was their top-rated animated show, Tom and Jerry Kids. And I got to tell you, if there was ever a horrible idea for a show, it was Tom and Jerry Kids, until you watched it. And it was funny. And it was genuinely funny. And you would go into his office with his creative team, and they were all a bunch of people probably in their 30s, maybe early 40s, who all were sitting in a circle around a campfire of a genius. And he was, you know, sitting there, and as they would throw out a joke, he would improve the joke. You would look at his notes. He was still sketching exactly what the gag would look like when it was put into a storyboard. It was really an incredible sight to watch. And when I walked in and Joe just told me he could do everything, he meant it from the bottom of his heart. He really just wanted, and by the way, each of them continued to work until the day they died. They continued to come into the studio every single day. It was really incredible to watch.
Great. I have a question online from Nick Kramer. He wants to know the origin of the 107 Facts series.
We have a series on Channel Frederator called 107 Facts about whatever cartoon show it is that you like. It's really simple. One day we realized that the high-end cartoons we were making on our channel were getting a lot of viewers and returning a fraction of the money that we needed to pay for them. Mm-hmm. And that we better find some other kinds of shows to do. So our then head of programming, a guy called Matt Geelan, decided that he was going to embark on a multi-month project of reverse engineering BuzzFeed. And he looked and saw how BuzzFeed did its little listicle shows, and we did a 5-minute pilot, and he saw that it worked. I think we did a 5-minute pilot about The Simpsons, something like that. So Matt and his successor, Jeremy Rosen at Channel Frederator, are experts at the YouTube algorithm, which is part of the way that people figure out, or that YouTube figures out what to do with videos that are put up, how many other pages to distribute it to, which would affect how many people watch it. And Matt started experimenting with the algorithm and would go from 5 minutes to 7 minutes, and found out that 80% of our audience watched all 7 minutes. So he'd go up to 11 minutes, and he'd go up to 15 minutes, and eventually we got out to 20, 25 minutes, and right there, we saw that 60% of our audience was watching through. So clearly there was something that the audience liked about all of these facts. He came up with a random idea. He said, whatever number of facts we do, it should always be a prime number. I said, is there a reason it should always be prime? He said, no, I just thought it would be fun that it was all be a prime number. And 107 was the number that we came up with. And that started out that series, which has now been on the air about 2 years. I think we've done about 300 episodes, and it just continues to go strong. We're about to launch our new season of 107 Facts.
That's great. Any other questions?
So anybody who likes Gravity Falls, Steven Universe, Family Guy, Cleveland, South Park, there's 107 facts about all those things on Channel Frederator.
Terrific. Any other questions?
Seriously?
No?
Guess I talked too much. I answered everybody's question. Oh, over here, yeah.
In your time working in the cartoon industry, what would you say is the one show that has stuck out at all and that you actually said yes to?
Adventure Time. Well, were you thinking of another one?
Well, I was thinking about every time I spend it Hanna-Barbera.
Oh, okay. It's going to sound ridiculous. I sort of like them all. But every one of the ones that we went to series with had something really special to offer it. Powerpuff Girls, I originally saw when it was a student film that Craig McCracken made called The Whoop-Ass Girls. And halfway through his student film, I was like, absolutely, we have to do this as a series. I got into a big fight with Cartoon Network because I still wanted to call it Whoop-Ass Girls. They were probably right. And it has probably been, probably the most profitable series that Cartoon Network has ever done. Dexter's Laboratory launched one of the most amazing careers in the business. Gendy Tartakovsky not only did that, but he did the first Clone Wars series for Cartoon Network for George Lucas. He created Samurai Jack, which has just come back in a revival miniseries, I think really just within the last couple of weeks. He has directed Sony Pictures' most successful animated film series that they've ever had, Hotel Transylvania. He just started Hotel Transylvania 3, and is really one of the great elders of the business, having done Dexter's when he was 23 years old. I thought Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken were amazing series. John Dilworth was an independent animator out of New York when he came and pitched his Courage the Cowardly Dog. Had been a festival award winner for years. Each of those was amazing. But I will say we have made 250 short films over the years, and each one of them is, even the ones that didn't go to series, were really great. I think of them as pieces of wonderful crystal. Right? Any filmmaker that can make a film and get a smile out of you along the way is for any of you who have made films, it's not easy to make a good film. And it's not easy to make a coherent film. It's not easy to make a film that, what do they say, comedy is hard, dying is easy, comedy is hard. It's hard to make people laugh. And every one of those filmmakers have come up and have amazed me as they do it. Yes?
First, I
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
I would like to ask if you observe that there are any qualities that sort of unify the successful cartoons that you've worked on. Are there certain things that
Yeah.
you could have?
The question is there any unifying principle on the cartoons that I have made? And, without sort of being glib, my Frederator's head of development, Eric Homan, actually pointed something out to me once that has actually proven to be true, which is that every series that we have done, the lead character is the creator of the show. And he said, 50% of the time they don't realize it. And I'll tell you a great little story about that. So any of you who have watched Dexter's Laboratory know that Dexter talks with a slight accent. And anyone who has ever met Gendy Tartakovsky or heard him interview will recognize that slight accent because it comes directly from Gendy. So the actress who played Dexter, he did not cast it as an accented character. He just cast her because she was a wonderful actress. And she heard Gendy speaking and decided to put that little twist on it. So one day, a couple of years into the show, somebody says to Gendy, I really love Dexter's accent. And he looks at them. Now, a quick backstory. Gendy and his family, he's the younger of two brothers. Their family came from Russia when Gendy was 10, when Brezhnev was kicking the Jews out of Russia, as fast as he could. And his family immigrated to Chicago. And Gendy became a cartoonist because he learned English from watching cartoons. So anyway, this person says something to Gendy about liking Dexter's accent. And Gendy's go, what are you talking about? And Dexter, speaks with a little thing like you do. He had no idea. And I related very directly because my mother was an immigrant from Bulgaria. And growing up, my sisters and I had no idea she spoke with an accent. And it wasn't until I got married that I found out that my mother spoke with an accent because I never heard it. Because when it's you or, it's something that you've been around your entire life, it just sounds kind of normal to you. And that's how Gendy was with his. So anyway, the idea that, in Adventure Time, the lead character, Finn, in the original pilot was actually called Penn. Penn Ward actually realized that was him. And in fact, when he did the series, he changed the name because he realized that once he went to series, if he was going to be locked down with that character for the rest of his life, people would be torturing him, which, by the way, they still do because he is one of the great rock stars that has come out of the animation business of his generation. So I would say that, at least in short comedy cartoons, that one of the reasons that actually I insist that everyone pitch their cartoon to us live, we don't take a pitch, by a storyboard being mailed in, is we have realized that watching that creator inhabit that character in the pitch is part of what we're looking for when we say yes to a film. Sir?
What's the protocol for pitching? How does one get in your office?
The question is, what's the protocol for pitching? I have a way of being in our studio that drives everyone crazy because we will take any pitch from anyone. I was listening actually to an animation podcast recently of two guys who have a small animation school in Ohio, and they were interviewing a director who has worked on and off with us for like 20 years. And she was saying how we gave her her first break. And the guy who runs the school said, well, I called Frederator when I was 16 with an idea for a cartoon. And I was shocked when Eric Homan, who runs development for us, called me back and talked to me for an hour. And so in our shop, we really are open to anybody with any idea that they have. There are two reasons for this. One is that we're a small shop, and everyone brings their stuff to Disney and Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon long before they come to us. And so we don't know where the next great idea is coming from. The other thing is that when I was in my early 20s, I worked for an avant-garde music distributor called the New Music Distribution Service, run by two composers, Mike Matler and Carla Bley. And Carla had a rule at the New Music Distribution Service that we will accept any record that comes into us. And if it sells only one copy a year, that we had to keep it in stock. And her reasoning was that she had been rejected by so many people over the years that she didn't ever want to reject anybody. And I really learned a lot from that time with Carla. It was an incredible belief to have. And my point of view was that whoever comes into us, we need to give them a hearing. You never know what they have. And the other day I got an email from a young man who had just graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And he said, I just wanted to write to you, tell you I've graduated. You probably don't remember, but when I was 11, I sent you an email and you wrote back to me. And that was what really gave me the inspiration to go to school. And I started to cry, right then, in my office, for real, because that's why we do it. So anybody that has an idea, they come in, we'll talk to them. We won't say yes most of the time. We say no thousands and thousands of times for every yes. But, anyway, that's how we do it.
Got a question from online. David Nimitz, a good friend of mine, he loaned the 300 toys to the exhibition.
I know. I can't imagine what his house looks like.
Yeah, no, he wanted to know what you thought of all the toys in the exhibition.
When my wife walked in, she looked around and said, "Oh, it looks like our house." There's an interesting thing. I love all the toys, so let me start with that. I used to go to all the flea markets that Dave visited myself to pick up a bunch of this stuff. It's a wacky thing about Hanna-Barbera. So Joe and Bill started this company when they were 48 years old because they had been fired from MGM. Mm-hmm. And all of their friends who had who had really invented the cartoon industry were also out of work because all the studios had fired them. Mm-hmm. Somehow or other, they persisted. A lot of people started studios, but for some reason, talent was one of them, stubbornness was another one of them, a need to feed their families was another one of them. Hanna-Barbera persisted. Yeah. But Joe and Bill were not natural entrepreneurs like a Walt Disney. Yeah. They did not start the company with vision. They just started it because they wanted to make a living. Mm-hmm. And so when their stuff started being merchandised, they had no idea about the idea of what we would now call quality control. And so if somebody paid them for a license, they said yes, and then bye, see ya. Yeah. And as you'll see as anyone will see when you look at all these things, some of them are just ugly as sin. You can barely recognize Fred Flintstone. Mm-hmm. To me, the ones that are really weird is when Fred Flintstone has blonde hair, like Barney. You can't, what were they thinking? And so Dave knows that there is a whole series of collectors who actually won't collect anything that actually looks like the characters. They only collect stuff that is what in our business is called off-model.
Red Huckleberry Hound.
Yeah, the red Huckleberry, that's the best, right? But I love looking at the stuff. Yeah. I'm really happy that it's really in somebody else's house other than mine, because the one thing that I found that's really tough with all of the old toys is keeping them dust-free, right? That's really tough. Flat art's much easier.
All right, and another question from Pat and Rich, who are just in the other room. Does Fred have his eye on VR technology?
That's a hard one. Frederator has its eye on VR technology. I personally, at the moment, could care less. Yeah. And I have two reasons that I care less. One is I just don't like games. And to me, VR is a perfect medium for gaming. I'm skeptical about it for storytelling with this proviso, which is every piece of my skepticism can be proven wrong by the next creative person. To me, creative people are the only ones who really see the future and can define what is around the corner. I can't do that. You know, at root, I might be a creative business guy, but I'm a business guy. I don't see the future. Creative people see the future. My skepticism comes that a storyteller needs to be in control of what a person does. And right at the moment, VR is so magical to everybody that the first thing they do when they see something in front of them is turn around and go, what's over there? And what's over there? And that means that at least at that moment, the storyteller is not in control. To me, there's a reason that a proscenium stage, when you go to see a Shakespeare play or a musical or something, is limited, because your eyes go there and turning around doesn't do you much good, right? Because the storyteller is forcing you to be here. That being said, I'm waiting for that young creative person, old creative, doesn't matter who it is, creative person to prove that wrong. And based on my track record, I'm likely to be proven wrong.
Okay. One more question? Anyone? You good? Okay, well, Fred, would you mind signing some catalogs for people?
I would love that.
Along?
That'd be great.
All right, well, Fred, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All done? Turn it off.